Welcome everybody to our first VCAP6-DCV design session as part of vBrownBag EMEA. Today we're hosting two VCDXs, Jason Grierson and Gregg Robertson. They're going to co-present, and this is a great way to start a series. Of course, this is we are a global organization. You can use the @vBrownBag @vBrownBag LATAM, @vBrownBag EMEA hashtags to talk to us, but we all share one Twitter hashtag, hashtag vBrownBag. This particular series will be done on Tuesdays. It will be done in EMEA time. It is depending on the presenters' times, so it may not always be at 7 p.m. British Standard Time. With that, my guests, Jason, my presenters, Jason and Greg, do you want to say something about you before we hand over control?
Sure. You want me to go first?
Go for it.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Jason Grierson. I've been in the IT field for about 14, 15 years now. Kind of done a mixed bag of tricks through my career. So started with the Microsoft line of certifications and that sort of stuff, and then jumped into VMware around version 2.5. So the first time I kind of saw that vMotion was a magical moment for me, and I ran down that train ever since. I guess it's been about a year ago now since I got my VCDX, and prior to that I spent about a year and a half working on my DCA and my DCD, and primarily really focused on the DCD story, which is why I wanted to help out with this, because I know a lot of people struggle with it and that shift between the DCA and the DCD. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
I remember that you did that awesome webpage with the tool for the version 5, virtualtears.net. So
yeah, I'm working on a new version as well. I just haven't written the 6 and seen the stuff outside of the beta, so I'm going to go and write it shortly, and then I've been loosely working on it, so I'm hopefully going to have an updated version for you guys in the next few months.
Awesome, thank you. And Greg? Greg, if you're speaking, you're on mute. I know that you had to go through the phone. All right. Jason, I'm going to make you presenter right now.
Sure. So hopefully Greg's connection at the hotel there comes through for him, and he can jump in on the later halves, because my slide deck only goes so far down the objective 1.1 because it is a larger section. So we'll drive up to that part, and then after that we can kind of wing it, or hopefully Greg jumps on and can complete it for us. So with that said, I guess we'll jump in. So objective 1.1 of the DCD is gather and analyze business requirements. So what we kind of wanted to go over here, is I want to do a quick recap of what the DCD is going to expect of you. So what do you expect, and how do we score points on it? Because I think that's a section that isn't really talked about enough. So when people do go into this exam, they don't really have a great understanding of what they're going to see. So it kind of gives them a bit of a shock and awe when they sit down the first time and write it. So we'll go over that really quickly, and then we're going to be working through the sections of 1.1, which is associating a stakeholder with information that needs to be collected, utilize inventory and assessment data from current inventory to define a baseline, analyze the customer interview, and so on and so on. We're going to break these sections down, and not only are we going to break them down, I'm going to try and give use case examples or what the exam will kind of test you on with that. So something I struggled with when I wrote the DCD was I kind of went through all this study material, and I really didn't extrapolate how the exam's going to ask me on that. So that's something I want to focus on, because the blueprint gives you extremely good baseline for the proper design methodology that VMware wants you to go through. And it's not just VMware. You're going to see this design methodology throughout lots of different places. Project managers use it, other architects use it. So you're going to see it a lot. So it gives you a really good baseline, but what I really want to do is kind of extrapolate how the exam is going to hit you on that, because this blueprint lays the groundwork for the VCDX as well, so you're going to see a lot of correlation there. And then at the end, how does that apply to the exam? I actually merged this into each one of the sections itself. So at the end is kind of just a wrap up and kind of just a links back to the slides and that sort of stuff. So jumping into the design overview. So what is the DCD6 or the VCAP-DCV design consist of? And the exam is 175 minutes, so that's 2.9 hours or just under 3 hours. It's now only 18 questions. A lot of people will think, oh, 18 questions, no problem. But trust me, those will be the the most grueling 3 hours and 18 questions, of your life. It will be an intensive exam, and time is still of the essence. So what that breaks down to is you're looking at 9.7 minutes per question. So what I usually recommend, or the strategy I take on this exam is the exam does give you the capability to skip over questions and come back to them. I primarily focus on getting all the design pieces done first, like the actual dragon, like on the example on the right here. I go and do all the design questions because they're worth a lot of points, and then I double back to the drag and drop. So the passing score is 300. And the format is a drag and drop and design tool. So your two questions you're only going to see is a drag and drop like this, which we're going to get into shortly, and then you're going to see like a full-on kind of like design Visio kind of a canvas where you can drag things around, and they're going to ask you to extrapolate requirements and things of that nature and build a design. So how does one score points? So the drag and drop. There's two ways to score points. The first way is each source button will be worth 1 point. So you can drag these, you're going to have a list of requirements or other things they're going to ask you, and then you have to drag them over to the right-hand section and have them snap into these categories. So in this example, 01 and 04 was in availability, and 02, 03, and 05 is in manageability. So each one of these are worth 1 point, and as you can see, you can score up to 9 points, and sometimes the questions will allow you to kind of get halves, and other times it's an all or nothing. The second way is each target is an all or nothing, like I was talking about, where they want you just to score, they want you to have all these in the right categories. So that's kind of how the drag and drop is scored, and these can vary. As you can see, there's 9 points on this one, and there's 3 to 4 points on this one. So typically most questions are going to be, kind of a mixed bag. I guess you could say between 4 and 10 points. I'm not sure what the exact metrics are, but you're going to score a couple points per question there. So the next type of question you're going to get is a design. So the design tool is a big white open canvas with usually like a kind of little drop down button on the bottom there that allows you to select items you can move onto the canvas and connect things and drop things, and you can delete things and break connections. So this is how it is, and how you get marked on this is every single piece or every item that is put onto the design canvas is worth a certain amount of points. So you can actually see the total score breakdown on the right here. So RDM is worth 4 to 4 if you put 4 of them on there, and so on. So it goes and calculates all your connections and those sorts of things. Now, there is ways you can lose points. So obviously, if there's something missing, you're going to lose a point, or you get deducted a few points or a point per device that isn't needed. So if you're putting in extra stuff that isn't required in the design, you're going to lose points there as well. So I put a heavy emphasis on this. So I encourage everyone to make sure they take their time on these design questions because they are worth a lot of points. Some may even say this is kind of like a make or break point on the exam. Also, there is a master design question that is probably the single biggest question worth the most points. So definitely make sure that you allocate enough time for that. With that in mind, all this information. This isn't secret NDA breaking stuff that I've put in here. This is all from Jordan Roth's blog, who works on the education team. So I highly encourage anyone who's writing the DCD to go and visit his blog. He talks much more in detail about this subject matter and how everything breaks down and kind of just pulls the clouds away or the veil away and shows you how it works under the hood. So with that in mind, we're going to jump right in. So with the first point in Objective 1.1, which is associate a stakeholder with information that needs to be collected. So what does this really mean? So these are people or roles that you're going to need to talk to collect data to shape your requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks. That's eventually going to lead to a conceptual design. So when you're first kind of starting a project, you're going to need to talk to certain people, and you're slowly going to ask certain questions and pull information out, and then that's going to shape things. So when you first kind of read this, or when I study it, it's kind of like a common sense section. people are like, well, let's, there's not much to that, but it's really kind of, knowing who to talk to and how to pull those requirements out. And I really emphasis on the requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks, because that's really what it's going to boil down to, especially when we get into later sections as well. This will also map to availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, and security, or NPRS. You sometimes may see a cost at the end of one of those as well. So as we work through the chapters, and we'll talk about it, and as you get other people do presentations on the other objectives in the DCD, you're going to see these kind of marry together a bit. And especially if you pass your DCD and move on to the VCDX, this is a huge critical part of your design with the VCDX, is making sure that your requirements and constraints also marry up to the availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, and security aspects from your stakeholders' requirements. So moving on, so what does this look like? So who do we talk to? So these are kind of some standard rules of people that we would typically talk to or have in meetings when you're pulling out these requirements that are going to help shape your conceptual design, which is an IT director, network engineer, storage engineer. You'll have a computer or virtual infrastructure engineer sometimes, CEOs, CFOs, CTOs. Managers of all walks of life, engineers, or even sometimes the end users will be in there. They'll have requirements from an end user's perspective. So these are all roles that can come up and people you can talk to help shape that from a design aspect. So again, this kind of leans a little bit more on the VCDX kind of side if you're really kind of building a design or you're sitting down with the customer and going through this design process with them. So what does that look like from this exam's perspective? So what they're going to look for, or how this is going to play in, is you're probably going to see this in possibly some drag and drop scenarios, and it's also going to play in the design tool. And how that works is in a drag and drop scenario, they might have a question where they're going to ask you things like pull out the required rules that you need to talk to, or these users or these specific rules have requirements, and that will play into later chapters. Like when we get into the requirements, constraints, and assumptions and risks, these rules really kind of marry together with those, and that's kind of like what you'll see questions around. They're going to be looking at which rules should you talk to and how do you pull the requirements out of them. So this is a very basic question. Essentially, it's a scenario where you've been hired as a consultant for Cyro Sports Company, you're building a new virtual data center. After a quick conversation with the company, it appears the scope of the project will revolve around a new storage compute networking. Which stakeholders should be considered for the first planning meeting? So this is just a made-up question that I just did this for this presentation just to get the kind of the point across. So in a drag and drop scenario, you would drag your requirements over to the required rule. Really simple there. So moving on to the next category, which is utilize inventory and assessment data for a current environment to define a baseline state. So what does this mean? What does the customer have, and how do we find it? So once you sit down and kind of talk to that first stage and talk to all your key stakeholders and get the information out of them, the next step is, what do they currently have in the environment? Now, sometimes this information is readily available, other times it's not. Sometimes those stakeholders will have a really good idea of what is there, other times they won't. So, if you're designing a new infrastructure or a new project for a company, you need to know what's there, because, and also if you're going on to your VCDX defense or planning to write a design for that, this is a critical point, because if you design a new infrastructure of 7 servers and this much compute and memory and networking and storage, they're going to ask you, well, where did those metrics come from? Like, how did you know it was seven servers? How did you know the performance is going to hold up? How did you know how the availability is going to hold up? That all comes from a state analysis or a current state analysis document. So you need to be able to have what they have there now so that you can know their performance. So the performance and the requirements and things of that nature, so that you can actually properly design the new infrastructure and give them enough capacity and that sort of stuff, and defend it. Because it's easy enough to build something out, but what you'll find is, even if you go into a customer and you design something for them and they come back to you 3 years later and management shifted or employees shifted and they said, well, why was this built this way? This is really crucial in the documentation, so you could say, this is why we gave you this many servers or built it this way. It's validation on your design. It's a way to back up it's the proof in the pudding. So how do we find this information? So there's a couple different ways. So you could do a state analysis. There's a couple different tools we can use for that. Sometimes companies will have a current inventory, so they'll have this information readily available for you. You can review documentation that they supply for you, and you can interview stakeholders in the project, which we did previously. So sometimes they'll have that information, other times not. So what are two of the main tools that I typically see people using for this if they don't have a current state analysis, or maybe they have half of it or an inventory document, but it's really not supplying you with the information you need, is the VMware Capacity Planner is a very good tool. You can have a VMware partner come in and they run this report, and it does a state analysis, and it tracks all the CPU usage, disk usage, memory, all that good stuff, and it spits out a report that tells you what's there, what's recommended, how to size it, that sort of stuff. So it really kind of gives you the meat and potatoes of all the information you would really need to help design further in the project, not only at a conceptual level, but more at a logical level or a physical design level. So this, that report is going to be really critical in those two phases later on in the project. Another tool I've used in the past a lot is the Microsoft Map tool. It's free, it's really easy to use, and it really kind of gives the same kind of information back. So that's kind of just something handy to keep in your side pocket. I've seen other people use PowerShell scripts, perfmon, WMIs, lots of different ways to achieve this. Realistically, what you're looking for is you want to see what the customer has and what their load is, and that's kind of information from a sizing perspective. Moving on, so an example of this would be, where are you going to see this on the exam? So this is most likely going to come up as information as to help you pull out requirements in the design tool. This could be like, and they'll sometimes give you a partial state analysis or a full state analysis. So an example of this would be, this is actually taken from one of the mock design questions that they gave us for the DCD defense that we would have to design against. So this is all public information. It's all, they don't use this in the VCDX defense anymore. But so they give you a couple bullet points, and then they kind of give you a very small, loose state analysis of what's currently there. So this is a good design scenario if you want to work through this. So they give you, the client has engaged a VMware partner to run a capacity planner, and on the right we have the output. Client is a service provider that wants to set up a dedicated management cluster for internal use. They want to reduce hardware footprint and reduce license costs of Oracle and IBM WebSphere. Design for possible multi-site scenario with VR capabilities, select the appropriate RAID levels, design a fault-tolerant network, and the client has an existing vService solution that they would like to leverage. So this is a really good example of what the exam might ask of you, possibly through a drag and drop, more than likely through a design tool, is they're going to give you a series of information, and you're going to need to pull out the requirements, constraints, risks, or other information based off a state analysis to help you design. So another example of this might be they could give you something, let's go back to the previous slide there. They might give you like the little picture here on the right, and say we want a cluster that has n+3, but we require n+2 during maintenance periods or something like that. So they're going to be looking for you to have the skills to extrapolate that information and do that sort of thing. So that's how this chapter is kind of going to look on the exam. Moving on, so analyze customer interview data to explicitly define customer objectives for conceptual design. So kind of how we were discussing earlier, this is all, if you were to look at a giant flow chart, this whole process is kind of one giant flow chart that's going to lead to the next thing and the next thing. So what this chapter is talking about is, once we have all that interview data, how do we take all this and transfer it into a conceptual design? So things that we're going to look at is goals, scope, requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks. So once we get all that information from interviewing the stakeholders, we're gonna pull all that stuff out, and that's really going to help drive a conceptual design. Now, requirements does break down into two pieces. It does break down into functional requirements and non-functional requirements. We'll talk more about that in section 2.1 because it's a little bit of a deeper topic, and a lot of people get confused between these two. Essentially, kind of a Coles Notes version. A non-functional requirement is, think of it as a requirement kind of with a constraint. So, you know, a straightforward requirement would be, I need an Exchange server. You know, a non-functional requirement would be, I need an Exchange server that can handle 500 emails per minute or something like that. It has an additional constraint on that requirement. But in later sections, we'll delve into that more. The main ones we want to focus on is just goals, you know, scope, requirement, constraints, assumptions, and risk. And the important part of this, if you're in a real world scenario, or you're designing for your own company, or you're working for a consulting company designing, is, you know, the scope's really important. And most contractors or consulting companies will you know, they'll define the scope very quickly, because it kind of drills down on how they're going to bill and what's in scope and what's out of scope, because a project can quickly run off the scales if that's not established. And then the requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks, you know, that's all going to shape things as well. And then obviously the customer is going to have you know, goals, you know, out of those pieces that you're going to want to focus on. And then at the end here, I have an example of what a conceptual design can look like. A conceptual design can look a lot of different ways. This is just one example. So once you have that information, you'd be able to build this. One side note is, typically in the design tool, you're probably going to more than likely be working at a conceptual design level or a logical design level. It's been my experience that from the design tools perspective, it's a little too hard to do a physical design, and the reason for that is, you know, it's hard to run every line to where everything's going to plug in and get all in that nitty-gritty in detail. So in most cases, you're probably going to be looking at a conceptual or logical design. Analyze customer interview data to explicitly define customer objectives for a conceptual design. So this is kind of where my slide decks I got worked up to and didn't have time to finish the decks out. But so an example of this would be, or how this works in the exam would be, really kind of hammering home the requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks. And pulling them out of an example. So, and this is kind of mirroring the first few pieces together here. So they're like, an example of a question would be, they're going to give you an example like, you have been hired by Zyro Sports as a virtualization consultant to design their new virtualization project in a new data center. After interviewing the key stakeholders, the following information was provided. Now, I didn't get a chance to finish this example. So they're going to say, they'll give you a snippet from, you know, a bunch of different stakeholders. So the IT director will give you some requirements and or constraints, or what his problems are. The CFO will give you the same kind of a spiel. And, you know, you're going to have that from a number of different stakeholders. And then they're going to give you a bunch of questions. Like, they're going to say, you know, break these out based off requirements, constraints, consumptions, and risk, and they'll give you examples. I wanted to kind of build this one out. I don't have a great example at my ready here, but it's going to marry the first few chapters that we talked about here together. So you're going to be having those stakeholders. They're going to be giving you some form of information. You're going to extrapolate the requirements, constraints, and risks, and you're going to want to categorize them accordingly based off the question.
Don't worry, Jason. At some point, Greg is already on the line, and at some point we'll be able to open his presentation. Maybe we can review the examples then.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's kind of what I had up to that. So that's about the halfway point. So if Greg's jumped back on, do you want me to stop sharing briefly and send me the email?
You should have the email now. Go ahead and check your inbox if you can. If you want to stop presenting while you check that, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll just see you.
Yeah. Bear with me for 1 sec here. Let me come on.
And Greg, just confirming that you're on the phone.
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. You ever have to do a presentation blind?
Yeah, a few times, but yeah, it's unusual there.
Okay, so I got the presentation up. Let me start it up here. Slideshow from the beginning. Oops. Can people see my screen now?
Yes, that's a very nice presentation there.
Perfect. Yeah, so we're on the title page here, and let me just get past that.
Yeah, so not to worry. no time to waste there.
Yeah, so this is your introduction page.
You might as well introduce yourself, Greg.
Hey, yeah. So, hi, I'm the guy that was late. So I'm Greg, VCDX 205, vBrownBag host, communities moderator, vExpert for a number of years. I blog from the SapphirGeek.co.uk, and I tweet from @Gregg Robertson 5. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't want to cover off too much of what Jason did, but I mean, this is what I covered, or the associated stakeholder with the information that needs to be collected. So, yeah, as I kind of said in here, this is down to the questions you need to ask, and also who you need to ask these questions to. These are the ones you're going to ask during the design workshop. Yeah, I've kind of said it depends on if you want one big one where people come to and go at certain points, or multiple ones where you speak to different business unit teams. I personally like to try bring in the following different people, and then, yeah, try and speak to all of them and then kind of break off from there. So normally you want to speak to the administrators, the hardware administrators, backup, storage, desktop OS guys, the security officers, the project sponsors, and then one I always find quite helpful is to always speak to the end users or the developers or the help desk personnel, because these guys are normally the people who are going to tell you what's in the shadows. So, you know, they'll come in and they'll tell you what the problems are, is there any impact, and sometimes they are negative. That's sometimes a good way of finding out information. So these good discussions, as I say, also easy to have in the hallway over a coffee, and they've alerted me to unknown risks that would have severely impacted my design and delivery if I hadn't spoken to these people. If you go to the next slide, Jason.
Yep.
I'm going to do this a bit quickly because I don't want to. Yeah, kind of utilize customer inventory. So yeah, this is normally there's kind of different ways you want to do this. So you can identify virtualizing candidates and applications. So as Jason covered off, you know, you would use certain tools like Capacity Planner. You can use existing documentation and a number of other pieces. Normally, what you would do if you're doing it through the Capacity Planner is you would capture a baseline performance metric, including the average and peak loads, because you want to kind of run this for hopefully quite a number of weeks to be able to get a good understanding of, yeah, when are the peaks, are they doing month-end runs, what's the peak workloads, what's the requirements of it if you're doing a migration. This would feed into your capacity requirements, also into your consolidation ratios, and you can also use it later for comparison purposes. So what a lot of places say is they say, well, we wanted, they want to be able to do their whole project and then be able to compare it. So that normally works out pretty well. There's also normally you want to try to identify unique dependencies. So every customer has their strange dependency that they're looking for. If it's an old system, if it's some kind of weird networking piece, if it's a security requirement, they always have unusual requirements, but as well as dependencies. And that kind of comes into Jason's mentioning of non-functional requirements. You've got to identify reusable hardware for the design. So again, coming to non-functional requirements of, do you have to reuse hardware? What's that? And then the non-functional can also come into a constraint. If you have to reuse that, is that going to be possible? And then some or all of these items that you've pulled in will normally produce different design decisions / requirements, constraints, etc., and possibly even a risk. Yeah, so define customer priorities for defined objectives. So my perspective on it, yeah, as I said, it's kind of straightforward. From the design workshops and interviews, you've collected what their objectives are, and also ensured from the workshops that there are no obvious conflicts of people's plans for the solution. So you normally will do like a requirements traceability matrix, or even just a requirements workbook to work out, and then be able to then say, okay, actually, this person's asked for this, but this person's asked for this. There's a conflict there. But I've kind of given an example. So normal customers' objectives, they would come in and say they want a virtual infrastructure capable of supporting consolidated countries. Let's use an example. It has to be highly available, disaster recoverable, standardized infrastructure, simplified, and improved support model. So that's taking down management overhead. DR, so it's kind of a functional and non-functional requirement as well as a constraint. They want DR with VMware SRM and EMC recovery point. So that's a constraint that you need to have to use technology they've already chosen. Obviously, I work for Dell EMC, so Dell EMC recovery point, there's nothing wrong with it. Provide virtual infrastructure that can provide 99% availability or higher. So when you come in, you want to try and work out what the availability is. And then I won't go through all of these, but that's the kind of pieces you're looking at. You also want to look at growth of virtual machines and different pieces like that and for how long. So that's normally how you start picking up a lot of objectives. If you go to the next slide, Jason. So yeah, this is kind of mapping the previous one and the different pieces. So ensure NPRS considerations are applied. So I quite like that this is in here now because it wasn't in previous pieces, and as Jason can also attribute to, it's really important pillars for the VCDX. So even though it's good that they've brought this into the DCD now, because I think it's quite important. It's something I do in all of my designs. So for the requirements, normally what I do, kind of using the same examples as I had earlier, what you'll try and do is you'll try and map it to design characteristics. It might cover all of them. It might only cover a few of them. So obviously highly available disaster recoverable is availability and recoverability. And then, common standardized infrastructure manageability, because you want to cut down on management overhead. The design must account for 30% growth of virtual machines and storage, performance. So normally this is a good way of mapping it. Jason gave really great examples of how to map it into the exam. But yeah, if you're also looking at doing the exam and preparing for this for like real world designs, then at least for me, this is the method I use. I find it quite beneficial, and then this is really great to then be able to map also NPRS into the different design decision tables. So it's normally a good process. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so given the results of the requirements gathering survey, develop requirements for a conceptual design. So again, I'd say this should be relatively straightforward as you've now spoken to the applicable people and have taken down all the requirements, ensure there's no requirement conflict. Requirements always have to be very precise, so that there's no misinterpretation. So you don't want to cause scope creep. Scope creep is the cancer of any project, and it forces you to know exactly what the customer requires and have to validate this as correct before you start the logical design. So not all projects are as clear-cut as you do conceptual, sign-off, logical, sign-off, physical, sign-off, but in an ideal world, that's what you want to try and do. At least from the design workshops, you pick up all the requirements, create something like a requirements traceability matrix, for example, be able to take all of those requirements, find out who said it at what time, and then present it back maybe to certain people, to the key stakeholders, and say, this is requirements, this is what I understood. I'll send you a copy as well, and can you confirm that this is actually applicable? And then that should make sure that there's no scope creep.
And I really like,
for example,
that you included in there the word develop the requirements, because a lot of people will put things that are not really feasible, like I want 100% uptime, and you really have to work with them and educate them, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that is very true. I mean, I've been speaking to a customer fairly recently who said they want an RPR of 0. So, these kinds of things are, you've got to speak to people and say, well, realistically, what you're looking for. If somebody comes in and they say availability of 5 nines, then that's fine, but then what is the impact of that? How much is that going to cost? That's obviously going to impact cost.
Better get the checkbook out.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I don't think I'm bringing out anything interesting. You know, normally whenever I did, like even the prepping for the VCDX design scenario, you know, you're mocking with people. People will say, "I want 8 nines of availability." And you say, "Well, you know, it's going to cost you a lot." And like, okay, make it 3. But if you don't respond to somebody, you're going to be designing to, you know, 8 nines of availability, and that's just going to hurt you. So it's a good method of then, always sanity checking what they're saying. And that's to say, you've got to understand what people are saying, come back with conflicts. It's not just requirement conflicts, but also coming back and verifying what this person said, is it realistic? Because people are going to ask for as much as possible, but it's your job, especially in this piece it's meant to be for architects, it's your job as an architect to come in and say, in all honesty, this isn't really possible based on whatever reasons. Is it cost? Is it limitations of the software? Is it limitations of the hardware they're making you use? And then, those decisions can be made, because you don't want to not raise that, and then you go ahead and you raise them later on. The customer asks, why didn't you tell us in the beginning? It kind of comes in, as I say, I've got an example, you know, customer wants high availability, it's far too vague, because everyone might have an understanding of what availability is, and also where is that availability? You know, is it availability of a portal? Is it availability of what, you know, where's that availability? So you kind of comes in and you would say, customer wants 4 nines of availability for the front end portal and 3 nines of availability for consumer workloads outside of scheduled maintenance windows. So you're also going to be careful that if you're doing availability, you're not going to be impacted by scheduled maintenance windows. So if there is maintenance windows, you know, you obviously, well, you say obviously, I say obviously, but sometimes customers come in and say, well, if there's downtime, that's downtime to my customers. You promised me this amount of availability, but oh, by the way, we need to shut this down because I want to add something new. So you've always got to clear that out and make it very, very clear that you don't have scope creep, but also people coming back to you asking certain things. And then also, as I say, you would also include RPO and RTO values for these, in my opinion, so that the SLA mapping is very clear. So you want to come in, explain to them what 4 nines of availability equates to. I think my memory serves me right, that's 3.86 hours of downtime a year. Apologies if my memory sleeps on that, but yeah, you normally, that's how you're working it out. So yeah, if you change the slides, Jason.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, categorize business requirements for infrastructure quality prepared for the logical design. This is funny enough a lot of where they kind of went on NPRS. So this is actually an objective from the DCD 5 as well. I think they've just left it in here as well as adding please do ANPRS. So infrastructure qualities do come into ANPRS again. As I say, I'm glad this is mentioned. It's for the VCDX. They're very big advocates for mapping requirements to the infrastructure qualities. So, so for example, my previous consultant requirement would fall under availability, application of PCI SOX hardening guidelines would fall under security, and then, the ability to 1,000 developer workloads would be performance. This is also, as I say, very good if you're doing requirements mapping from the conceptual design to the logical design decision and then to the physical. The physical you're normally not putting in ANPRS, but you want to be able to apply those in there. So it's normally pretty good. I do a design decision table that has the infrastructure qualities in there to also show that when you're making a certain design decision, what are you meeting? So it normally works in pretty well for that.
Yeah, I know both from the VCDX standpoint and the DCD, this will be a topic that you will be asked on a lot. From the DCD's aspect, there will be a lot of take these requirements and map them to availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, and security. So Like an example of that would be recoverability would be like SRM, right? Performance would be, a performance metric. I need X number of CPU, compute, that sort of stuff. Manageability could be like virtual center, the tools that are involved with that. Availability could be like HA, something like that. So they're going to ask you to map this a lot. And I know from the VCDX people that I've mentored that have passed and failed or passed on a second or third attempt, this was the category where I think we improved a lot on when I was working with them. And this, I think they would all agree that this was kind of like a big help for them in passing the VCDX. That when they got their report back when they failed, this was a section that they really got hit on hard, and we went back and we improved on that mapping, and then they scored a lot better. So I put a lot of emphasis on this for sure in both programs.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's good, and that's probably why they're bringing it into it for here. As I say, that's why I like to do it from a requirements, but then also from like a design decision table, kind of put it in there as well. So it's quite clear. And then if you are doing a design, it's good for customers. Customers like to see that kind of stuff. And then if you're doing a design for the VCDX, I think if you do a design decision table like that, then yeah, it's going to help you to understand it and learn it better, and also possibly the people reviewing your design see that you know how you've mapped certain things. I think that benefits on both ends. If you go to the next slide. That was it. So my stuff was actually probably between the two, myself and Jason, it probably worked out not too bad. Jason covered a lot of the stuff in the DCD in the exam, and then I've kind of looked at it a little bit like Jason did, but also looking at it kind of in a real world way of if you were doing this, how would you do it, etc. I was doing exams like I keep calling it a DCD, the DCV design, they call it now. If you're going to do it, and it's the best way to try and make sure that design exam is for architects, then normally a lot of the policies you're doing this for and a lot of the objectives does map really well into like an architecture design.
I think the good and the bad thing about the DCD is the good thing is, especially when it comes to mapping a lot of the questions and pulling out your requirements and those sorts of things for the design questions and the drag and drop, is the good thing is they're set in stone. You can't go back and ask the customer, and things can't creep out on you, or scope creep can't happen. The downside to that is you can't go back to the customer. So like if you read a question and it's ambiguous to you, you can't just go and be like, extrapolate further. Like, I don't understand. Like, you can't say that in the exam. You're kind of just sitting there and you're like, crap. So it's kind of a double-edged sword with the DCD. Like, they're going to give you so much information, and you have to work with that information. However, in the real world, if someone says something and you don't have enough information to make a decision on it, you just go back and ask them again, or find someone else that has the answers, or that sort of stuff. So I think a lot of people struggle with that in the DCD, where they're just like, they read the question and they're not quite sure what to do with it, and they're like, I need one more piece of information. If this was a real world, I would just go ask that person. But it's kind of a double-edged, good and bad. But like you're saying, Greg, I'm glad they mapped more of it towards the VCDX, because it is a bit of a jump prior before. So
I've opened the microphone for everybody. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, because also I know for like the mapping, they love asking for. I haven't done the new ones, but I know the previous ones. They always like you to map, and you mentioned it, Jason, between functional and non-functional. And sometimes that's never that clear, especially when you're trying to map it in the design in the exam. Baz Raymond did a really good blog posting around like functional, non-functional risks and constraints, and that I would highly recommend looking that up. So it's BASRAYMANN. So Baz Raymond. He wrote up a thing when him and I were actually kind of preparing for the DCD5, and we were kind of chatting to each other, trying to work out, what's a clear definition between functional and non-functional, because there was always conflicting information. Some people would say if it's a constraint, then it's a non-functional. So he's done a good explanation of it. People are looking for, a way of defining that.
All right. Well, I think this method of having two VCDXs do their presentations and then comment on each other's presentations, I think it worked out really well. So I'm really happy with it.
We're not setting a precedent here.
All right. If there's no questions, then we'll end it here. Thank you very much, guys, for your time today, and thank you for those that attended live. And the recording should be up shortly.
Thanks everyone, and thanks for having us out. And I wish everyone the best of luck.
Oh, hold on. I think we have a question.
Oh, do we have a question?
Yeah. Let's see. No, Pietro just said thank you. All right. Thank you, Pietro.
No worries.
Cheers, guys.